we have to really reconnect ourselves to nature. That this separation between us and the rest of nature, and then us and each other, is what really is causing climate change, causing all these natural issues. It's not about any particular bad thing. It's about how we view our relationship to nature. So food for us and power, energy are two huge things that we can reintegrate ourselves with nature. There's no reason right now, 95% of all the new installed energy, even in this country, even at this time, is going to be solar and wind because it's cheaper, it's better, and it's quicker to put in than conventional energy.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who want to regenerate our planet, our communities, and build a collective future that's a little brighter and better than today. Together with our partners at forestplanet.org, our community has already planted more than 32,000 trees this year. That's one for every new listener and subscriber to our newsletter. These trees help to restore ecosystems, support biodiversity, and sequester more carbon, making our world just a little cleaner and just a little greener each and every day. Today, I'm honored to welcome a guest whose work is reshaping the future of climate philanthropy, Jared Blumenfeld. Jared is the president of the Waverley Street Foundation, where he is tasked with investing $3 billion into regenerative agriculture and renewable energy by 2035. Previously, he served as California's Secretary for Environmental Protection under Governor Gavin Newsom, and before that as Regional Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for the Pacific Southwest under President Obama. At Waverley Street, Jared is pioneering a bold spend-down strategy, recognizing that the climate crisis demands urgent action, not just perpetual endowments. His leadership emphasizes community-driven solutions that build climate resilience from the ground up. So we have quite a lot to cover today. With that, welcome to the show, Jared. I'm so glad to have you here.
So great to be here, Corinna. Thank you for having me.
Now, you've had quite a remarkable career, as that intro really revealed. First with the EPA under Obama, California Secretary for Environmental Protection under Newsom, and now leading Waverley Street Foundation. What motivated you to step into this philanthropy space, especially at this scale?
Well, super appreciate your podcast and everything you're doing to, I think, in these darker times, bring a light to cool stuff that's happening around the world. That's certainly what inspires me. I think I actually started my career as an environmental attorney right after the Rio Earth Summit in '92, and then worked for a group called the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and then ended up actually in local government. So having seen nonprofit, local government, state and federal government, one of the things that really struck me was how confined those institutions are by bureaucracy and the inability really to meet people where they're at in a real sense every day. So this is an experiment. Lorene Powell-Jobs and Lisa Jackson. Lisa I'd worked with at the US EPA, and she's now at Apple. And Lorene really came with a spirit of how do you mix kind of the spirit and drive and startup energy that exists in Silicon Valley with a bottom-up approach to climate change. So a lot of climate change philanthropy has been about how do you shape policies in Washington, D.C., which is important. How do you shape policies at the European Union or at the UN? All these are incredibly important. But what was missing was really the recognition of the incredible work that happens at a grassroots level that can, I think, through a different theory of change, really how small things can add up to make big things. How do we support those innovations? How do we lift them up? How do we get them to share with each other as a way of creating more durable change? What we've seen in many countries is that if you just do top-down policy, you can get some big impacts, but when there's a change in leadership, those can be eviscerated literally overnight. So our theory is that by involving community, we can have durable change and resilient change.
Wow. Well, that's such a difficult subject to tackle. I mean, I think about it, how over the past several years that I've had this podcast run, many of the guests I've had on have talked about the need for systems change, deeper change, broad change, which often means starting with regulations, legislation, systems change, right? And the fear being that individual contributors themselves can't collectively move the needle quickly enough because our individual impacts are akin to a rounding error, like 0.000000003%. If we did everything right and didn't ever drive and did all our own composting and raised a lot of our own food. I mean, if we literally did all of these things, that the amount of change that we can individually put forth is actually quite low. So given that that's the case, how do you see us being able to get enough of a groundswell into play where that bottom up kind of work could really create the lasting change that you're advocating?
Well, if you look at what hasn't gone right? So the 30 years of environmental movement, we haven't got where we need to go. We haven't been an electoral force that has really got enough traction to determine electoral politics in most countries. So my personal take, Corinna, is that if you look back at the first Earth Day back in 1970, the reason that Americans got involved in the environment and forced a Republican President Nixon to create the Environmental Protection Agency, to create the Clean Air Act, to create the Clean Water Act. Literally every statute that we care about was signed by President Nixon, not known as a great environmentalist himself. He didn't care about it at all. What he cared about was this huge public movement because people cared about the places that they loved. So I actually think that is a incredibly powerful and motivational force that is missing. In the years that have gone by, we've kind of given up agency to environmental groups, to elected politicians, and it's really time to take back some of that love and care. And now we really find ourselves at a unique transition point in history, because for the last decades, we had aspiration about the environment. Wouldn't it be great if we could have solar panels and battery on our roof? Really, the obstacle there that made it a very elite and not very affordable solution for most people was that it was expensive. The technology was expensive. The price of solar and battery has come down 90% in the last 15 years. And as a result, it now is an affordable solution, especially compared to the very high costs of utilities. So I think there is a revolution that is coming that we're already seeing in interesting places like Pakistan. In the last year, Pakistan has bubbled up as the #1 place on the planet for rooftop solar. And the reason for that was the energy that existed on the grid was expensive and unreliable. Solar became very cheap and very reliable. And so now is the time when individual action paired with collective financing, collective policy can actually really, I think, disrupt in a way that you saw a lot of disruptive technologies in the taxi industry like Uber and the hotel industry like Airbnb. Those are actually made up of individual people all taking action, and they've had a transformative effect. I think the same is going to be true of regenerative agriculture. People are realizing it's actually less expensive in many cases to practice regenerative agriculture than it is conventional. And so I am actually a believer that we can scale from the bottom up, that we aren't powerless. I think the narrative has to shift to something that you talk a lot about, which is that we want responsible companies. We want to reward those companies and support those practices that really invest in a shared prosperity.
So let's speak for a moment about what regenerative agriculture is, and perhaps even a bit about how it's being or has been politicized, and how we can then take a little more effect. Like this $3 billion sounds like a lot of money, but you spread that over, the next 10 years, and it's perhaps less money than we might need to completely transform our farming systems. So I'd like you to talk a bit about what Regen Ag is, and the framework that you actually consider it, and how much change you think we can make with this $3 billion investment over the next decade.
So regenerative agriculture, I think most people are familiar with organics. And when you go to the supermarket, I love going to Safeway and you read on the Safeway organics packet, this doesn't include harmful pesticides and fertilizers and things that can cause you harm. Basically, like, oh, why would I get the thing that does include all those nasty, toxic constituents? So organic grew and grew as a movement. It's a larger and larger sector of what people buy, primarily because what you eat, what you put into your body is pretty important as it relates to your health. And I think we all recognize that, both sides of the political aisle. I also think that farmers and farming around the world is an incredibly noble and important sector of our economy that we don't think about. And when you talk to farmers, when you go to the farm, they're looking at every way that they can save money. So regenerative, well, organic, often if you have organic peaches or blueberries, you can get a premium, not a large enough premium, but a premium when those farmers sell that on. Regenerative is more of an approach of not just looking at a single input, chemicals and fertilizers, but a whole set of practices. The most important of which for us, Corinna, is around soil health. And so the health of the soil, all those microorganisms that exist in the soil, is an incredibly important indicator of what you can grow in it. And you've covered this, consequently, how the microbiome in our gut is affected. So there's a pretty cool cycle between what exists in the soil and what exists in us. The deader the soil, the less productive that soil is going to be. So soil health relates to both carbon. So carbon can be stored in the soil. And we really are looking at this both as a community health, which is another element of regenerative ag. So you've got soil health, you've got the community health, you have biodiversity, you have, interestingly, like looking at a multiplicity, not just a monocrop, but how do you make sure that you're planting many different species together that all strengthen each other. And so an example that is incredibly compelling to conventional farmers as a first step into regenerative ag is not tilling the soil as much. When you think about the tractor with a blade going through that soil, every time you cut into the soil, you let carbon go into the atmosphere. And so that sounds like, oh, that's a great environmental thing. Like, how does that actually help the farmer? The farmer has to pay for the labor to drive the tractor, the fuel to power that tractor, and the maintenance of the tractor itself. So if you can reduce the number of times that a farmer passes, which on most crops is about, most row crops, things that grow in rows, is about 11 times. If you can reduce that to 1, that farmer has saved 10 trips. So you're seeing across the spectrum, doesn't really matter their political persuasion, doesn't matter if they care about climate change. They care about their bottom line and the health of their soil.
Well, and I think we can help people understand this also from a different perspective, just talking about that heavy farm equipment. The matrix of a healthy soil is quite lush. There's a lot of life in that soil itself, right? And if you're driving heavy machinery over that soil again and again, you are also compacting it. And when you compact soil, it has a harder time getting, water into the deep roots and things along these lines. I would imagine by reducing the number of times that you're driving that heavy equipment over the soil too, you're also enabling that soil to retain more health, to retain more life within. The reason I asked you specifically what your definition of regenerative agriculture was is because there are some, like regenerative organic certification, which are aiming to also include in that bucket things like fair pay, fair wages, fair trade, also humane practices, whether or not, meaning humane animal practices, to be certified humane. And given that some individuals like Gabe Brown, who I recently had on the show to specifically talk about Regenerative, he essentially stated, for me, it starts and ends with soil. Like, we need the soil to be as absolutely healthy as possible. And all of these other things are also good, but if we don't get that piece solved first, then, we're not keeping water in the soil, so we require more water. We're introducing too many chemicals, so we have more runoff. And this all results in other negative outcomes that are also quite costly for the farmer. So if we can get these in control, then we can have more positive outcomes in a relatively short amount of time, so that a farmer isn't investing millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars sometimes, in these fertilizers and pesticides just to be able to keep farming every year, which erodes the bottom line and also makes them less profitable. So I wondered if you could comment on that, and if you really feel like we need to also be talking about humane animal husbandry as it relates to creating this regenerative agriculture world, or if this is just overcomplicating the conversation.
So Gabe, is a pioneer in this, and certainly soil is incredibly important if you're growing the types of crops that he grows. If you have cattle and rangeland, the soil health is a very different discussion. If you're thinking about other types of crops like almonds or tree crops, the soil health discussions are going to be slightly different. So, and in each country that you go to and with each crop, you have to be a little bit adaptive. So to your point about economics, in California, which is where our foundation is based, is the fifth largest ag economy in the world. If you go to many towns in the Central Valley, which is the agricultural heartland, you can't get access to the food that is grown. So the issues of food distribution and health shouldn't be just that the food grown in Fresno is available in a Walmart, in a Walgreens or Walmart in LA. How are those local people benefiting from that farm economy? So certainly for us, the economics of farming and farm communities, building strong, resilient communities are important. Our particular focus, Corinna, in many of the places are to create local community systems. So the one that we really are proud of and are working with many who've been doing this for a long time is farm to school. How do you make sure that kids at lunch have access to healthy, affordable food from local regenerative farmers, so that the farmers then have long-term contracts? Farmers don't plant what we would think, farmers plant what they want. Farmers plant what they've already sold. So if they know that they have a long-term contract with Sacramento Unified School District, which we just visited, it's a huge 50,000 foot scratch kitchen. All those jobs in the kitchen didn't exist 5 years ago. They basically exist in an ecosystem with the parents, the school board, the teachers, all the staff, really important staff who do the cooking and cleaning and serving, all the way through the people that bring that food from the farmer to the school. And so those systems, when you're talking about individuals, maybe we can't make a difference. At a school and school district level, where you're talking about 1 million kids, you can start to make a difference and really transform local economies and make them, for instance, during COVID, those school districts were hubs for the whole community. They really became places where you could go to, even in a climate disaster, if there's heat or if there's flooding, or even, where there are people that are coming inside because of wildfires. Schools are now a hub. We wanted to really double down on what does it mean to fund the ecosystem that would support schools being able to buy farm fresh food from regenerative agriculture. So it's great to say we care about any of these values. For us, I think we want to make sure there's an economic sustainability element to it. And farmers traditionally get about 7 cents on the dollar. If you can bring that, in the case of farm to school, to 40 cents, they're going to be doing a lot better economically and more willing to plant regeneratively and grow regeneratively the next year.
So essentially, in that case, you're talking about also cutting out the middle guy between the farmers and the schools. As it stands right now, I don't think many people fully understand the challenges of our school districts and contracts that go into their food supply. I mean, it's almost looked at like, I think, military contracts for food. Like these things are planned pretty far in advance. And I've often wondered, as just for example, like if my child forgot to take their lunch or somehow it went missing or they didn't want to eat it and they asked for what they call a hot lunch. They call it a hot lunch, but they're not necessarily hot, right? They are getting processed food in a package, and typically that's not warm, and maybe yogurt in a package and maybe a milk in a package. Like everything's packaged. There's no fresh fruit. There's no fresh, salad or anything like that. So I'm really looking to see some guidance and leadership in this arena. Gabe Brown also talked about the desire to work towards something like this when he came on the show, about having community-based foods being able to be accessed by our school children. Healthy options that could inspire a community to get more engaged with this whole concept of regenerative agriculture as well. I wondered what the process is to that and how, if there's any success cases that you could bring up.
Oh yeah, this is great. You're going to be inspired, Corinna, and we can get lots of folks. I was just at Climate Week in New York, and we did a whole panel on farm to school in California, and there's universal free lunch for everyone in California. Many other states are replicating that. I think the answer was, of the 58 counties, 56 of them now have some farm to school grant or program. And when you go, they don't look like your son's school lunch. So it isn't processed. And we shouldn't be tolerating our kids having terrible food. We really shouldn't. And so many kids now both have breakfast and lunch and a snack in the afternoon at school. So thinking about this as a system, government can play an important role. You as a mom or any parent can play a really important role. So starting with your question, I think probably the largest school district in the country, LA Unified, just did a procurement and basically said, this is the food that we will be buying, and it has to be within 150 miles. It has to be planted in this way. They serve literally millions of kids every day. And so when you think about the largest cafeteria system in our country, by far, it's school lunches. Mm-hmm. So after that, there's institutions like universities and hospitals. These are all getting government money. And so we as taxpayers have an ability to shape that through local school board elections, through going to our universities. And that's really what it's been, Corinna. That's what's inspired me and this foundation, is when you talk to those parents who've got engaged and involved. Starting back, I don't know if you've ever had Alice Waters on the show, but Alice Waters...
I featured her on this show. I'd actually taken video of her doing a talk with the release of Monarch tractors. So though I haven't had a chance to interview her personally, I did get to meet her and filmed her on stage, included that as part of our content.
Nice.
Monarch Tractors is doing some really interesting stuff with electric tractors so that they don't have to use, more gasoline on farm and things along those lines too.
Yeah, but Alice back, I think now 30 years ago, created something called the edible schoolyard. Mm-hmm. Let's tear up some of the asphalt. Yep. Kids don't enjoy the asphalt. It gets crazy hot. And plant gardens. So across the world, there are now thousands and thousands of edible schoolyards where the kids understand how food is grown. They then can harvest that food with their parents, with teachers. It's part of the curriculum. So my biggest philosophy as a human, forgetting work, but it bleeds a lot into work, is that we have to really reconnect ourselves to nature. Yeah. That this separation between us and the rest of nature, and then us and each other, is what really is causing climate change, causing all these natural issues. It's not about any particular bad thing. It's about how we view our relationship to nature. So food for us and power, energy are two huge things that we can reintegrate ourselves with nature. There's no reason right now, 95% of all the new installed energy, even in this country, even at this time, is going to be solar and wind because it's cheaper, it's better, and it's quicker to put in than conventional energy. So the same is going to be true with food. Like the reason that the healthy food movement has taken off is because people realize the relationship between ourselves and our environment and the food we eat. And the whole Maha movement is really about how we remove some of that processed food, how we think differently about these. So I think there's really strong bipartisan support for a lot of the work that's happening on the farm.
I'm reflecting on a lot of what you've just shared. I'm here in Santa Cruz County in California. My school must be one of the two that is not yet implemented.
I can connect you, Corinna, because there was an amazing school supervisor from Santa Cruz. And she was one of the most inspiring people that I
absolutely.
heard at this
Love
conference.
to talk to them. But the reality of our school system is that some of the schools have even just gone away from having their own cafeterias. So Vine Hill Elementary, which is the school my kids go to, doesn't have a cafeteria. They essentially have to be able to brown bag whatever the lunch is. And so I think that makes it a little bit more challenging. So even in a district, it might be commonplace in other schools within the district, but at mine, not yet, right? So that's one thing I think about because this is a very health-minded community. In fact, we have several regenerative ag farms in the county. I go to our farmers market each week and get to meet with a lot of those farmers, and you can purchase a CSA box right there if you want to, or connect with the farmers who are growing it. A lot of access here. There's a ton of access. To your earlier point about the ravages that COVID put on our systems and how schools were kind of this real resource for community. I mean, they were operating to ensure that individuals who didn't have access to healthy food got lunch every day, right? And so even in the midst of COVID, we're providing resources in different ways than they had in the past and moving as nimbly as possible as a community resource. I think that is what's needed, especially as we consider where we're going with the future of, climate change and everything else that are bound to affect us with worsening storms and things along these lines. Now, I know regenerative agriculture in particular is your focus, so I want to get back to this. Being that these two pillars, regen ag and renewable energy, they're really connected in a lot of ways. It's the energy we consume, and it's the energy that we need to run a healthy lifestyle, to keep our lights on and warm and be able to do things like work at a computer and all the things that we rely on in modern life. How is the Waverley Street Foundation working within these two pillars and prioritizing work? Where do you see the strongest investment going, and how are you essentially conducting fundraising at this time? Like, where are the resources coming from?
Well, we were fortunate enough that Lorraine Powell Jobs made investment in Waverley early on. So we're actually doing the opposite, Corinna. We're starting with funds, and this is kind of your opening point. We want to meet the urgency of the moment with the funding that can have the greatest impact. So we're not seeking to spend the money for its own sake. We're seeking the impact that we can have at this time. Yeah, and if you think about reducing carbon, it's much better to reduce pollution today than it is in 10 years. We need to do it now. And also, to your point, most foundations, I didn't even realize this until a few years ago, only spend 5%. 5% of what they have in the bank, and they carefully work to make sure that the funds that they invest return at least 5% so that they can exist in perpetuity. Our goal is to make sure that we get the best work that needs to be done now funded. So an example actually in Santa Cruz, and I can't wait, Corinna, offline to work with you and your school district to think about how we can maybe make this an example that you can track over the years at your kid's school, is the Chef Ann Foundation. So the Chef Ann Foundation is now in every one of the 50 states. I know they work in Santa Cruz to help the school district design how they move from kitchenless environment to one where they have scratch cooking. So what does that need in terms of permits? What does that need in terms of staffing? What equipment do they need? So they actually work hand in glove with the school district. So it's very tactical, meeting a need that if Chef Ann Foundation wasn't there to do that work, no one would be able to do it. So they've really, really helped folks there. There's another group, actually, I think also down in Santa Cruz, called Kitchen Table Advisors, that helps farmers think about how to switch to regenerative. What do they need to do? Who are the farmers that they can talk to? Basically, it's like having your own coach or consultant that walks you through step by step how to do that work. And then we're working with local farmers to think about what are the landscape scale changes that need to happen that can be funded through things like the climate bond in California, which had money to help farmers switch from regenerative, rather conventional to regenerative. So even in a small community, obviously the Salinas Valley and Santa Cruz has a lot of, when you think about, I always think about it as like the berry capital of the world. Like if you want strawberries, if you want blueberries, raspberries, they're all grown there, with pumpkins.
Yeah, berries and artichokes for sure.
Yeah, a lot of artichokes.
Brussels sprouts, a lot of those too.
I grew up in England, Corinna, so just the mention of Brussels sprouts, I have, they aren't your kids' Brussels sprouts. So really transforming, to your point, the two energy systems, the one that relates locally also obviously relates to energy. We're thinking about hospitals and schools and universities as large institutional purchasers of both food and energy. Another really interesting cross-section, Corinna, actually happening in your neck of the woods all the way through the country, is called agrovoltaics, where people are realizing that they don't have enough water in some cases, which could be in Fresno County, and they need a land use to help pay for the farm so that it doesn't get turned into urban sprawl. Those farmers want to keep it in productive use, and so they're looking at, are there ways of mixing mainly utility scale solar and agriculture? So some cases those are sheep herders and farms. In other cases, that's actually crops that are being grown. So there's a whole interesting movement, which is that intersection of food and energy, called agrovoltaics. A really cool, further afield from Santa Cruz, in India, in Bangalore, we're working with this group called the Selco Foundation that looks at the human need. What are the needs that exist in a community, and then how can they be met with solar? So they have focused on health centers, health clinics, of which there's about 150,000 throughout India, local health clinics, and realized that they're all powered by diesel, and that diesel doesn't come from India, so it's very expensive. And for not a lot of money, you can change out those diesel generators to solar with battery. And in terms of scale, when we think about like, oh, well, what would it do to do one? I mean, why would we even invest in that? The answer is they've now done 12,000 in the last 2 years, primarily because when you do one, people take notice. Oh, that health clinic is now saving thousands of dollars a year. That health clinic, the people aren't getting sicker from all the diesel fumes when they go to deliver their baby. That health clinic now has more energy efficiency. So people want to see, I think the main thing that I would take away is that people want a proof of concept. They want to see it at a community scale, and de-risk it and then do it themselves. And so that's really the heart of the model that we want to support.
Well, to me, some of those solutions sound less like bottom up and more like top down. Because if you talk about a hospital or a large school or something to that effect, it's, you're tackling the infrastructure that affects a broad swath of the community as opposed to individualized homes. One of the things I've been concerned about, and I'd love your perspective on this because of the fact we're both kind of situated here in California, is the crumbling infrastructure that is our electrical delivery system. Like, we don't have an underground electric grid, and that is one of the primary reasons that we're so challenged for, I would say, years now with power outages, even just due to wind, with PG&E having to shut the power off because of the fact that they're concerned with the line sparking fires in the wilderness when we've got really dry tinder in our woods. It feels to me like if more and more individuals are to look at their lives and say, okay, well, I'm going to install solar, I'm going to remove my connection to the grid, like, we'll have less people paying into the system that would support the entire community in a way. So I feel like these two things could be serving in somewhat of an opposition to a broader community solution. And I just wonder if this is something you've put thought into, or if the Waverley Street Foundation has looked at ways to really tackle that on more of a broad basis.
So the first challenge that we're all facing, Corinna, is affordability.
Right.
It's great to say, oh, there's more and more renewable energy on the grid. And it's totally factually true that the price of all the technology for renewable energy has gone down 90%. But your bill hasn't gone down.
The energy
90%.
cost has gone up, like, considerably.
Yeah, like 100%.
At least.
So,
at least.
So depending what period of time. So people are really feeling a pinch, both at the pump and on their utility bill. So part of that is climate change. In my last job as the secretary of Cal EPA, we were in charge, Cal Recycle was in charge of cleaning up wildfire debris. So we were the first into Paradise. We were the first into every single Grizzly Flats. It was still burning when we went in. It is absolutely devastating to those communities. And you're right. Like, we have to think about this differently. The system that we have is limping forward, and the cost of undergrounding is one of the factors that is leading in California and in many states to cost increases on our utility bill. So I'm in the process because I just moved house and the tax incentives disappear at the end of the year. So there's a rush right now for your listeners. If they've ever thought about installing solar the next few months, you're going to have a hard time even getting a solar installer. But I'm getting battery. I have an electric vehicle that I can now. They were like, do you want the technology that you can put a plug into your car so that you can power your house in a blackout at night if you don't have battery? Like, wow. Back to India, they're now selling, you and I could trade energy in India between our solar devices and our batteries. So, and when you look at what has saved us, why we haven't had blackouts, it actually this is an unspoken, I'm not sure why it's been kept so under wraps. I don't know why people don't want to talk about this, but one of the big reasons that we haven't had blackouts is because of the number of people, the hundreds of thousands of people. I think we're now approaching 1 million homes that have battery storage and solar. And so the regulators who manage the grid in times of high energy use and a lot of risk, they call on those batteries, and they're basically supporting the grid. So I don't know, like, I don't think we had the same sense of urgency in other transitions. When you talk to taxi drivers that lost their medallions and they became worthless overnight, I don't
With
sure.
Uber and
Yeah, because of
Lyft,
Uber,
basically.
like they completely destroyed that industry. We all call them kind of technological heroes of disruption. Hopefully, we give that same leeway to solar and batteries because we don't have the money to do the grid infrastructure, and people need to focus their budgets on things other than energy when you can get it. They came out with a cost actuator for me. They were like, if we'd come to you 2 years ago, your energy bill would have been $100 a month. Now it's $350 a month. In 10 years, that estimator they said would be $2,500 a month. No one has $2,500 a month to pay their utility bills. So there is a solution. It's solar with batteries and all kinds of great financing. And yeah, how the utilities manage that is something they need to work out. But what we need to do is help people's utility bills go down.
Right. Well, I think the reason I brought this up is just because it is feeling very much like it's the haves that are able to invest in the solutions on their personal homes. In fact, because of the power outages that we were all experiencing around windstorms and fires, one of my dear friends, they installed solar and put 2 Tesla battery packs on the side of their home. I will not buy anything from Tesla. There are other options. That said, my solar power only covers about 70% of my usage. At the time that I invested in solar, I was counseled to get the panels for 85%, which we did. But since then, I started working from home, and we have 2 children, and we do more laundry. So all of these things mean you just use more energy overall. Our bill at the time we installed solar was about $350 to $400 a month, just from our energy usage for gas and electric, I should say, not just electric, right? And now it's crept back up to that. Like that's about where we are, and we'll likely end up with our true up higher than that. I don't know exactly what my true up will be at the end of June. So as it stands, costs are going up.
Yeah.
Cost to buy a solution for your community is high because in many cases, this means more infrastructure that again isn't funded. People are starting to see on their bills for their electricity different fees that didn't exist before. Like
Correct.
just oh, well, this one's an infrastructure fee and this one's a delivery to your home fee and this, so on and so forth. And I've even seen people sharing their bills online now that are at something like $1,200 for a month.
Yep. So no one can afford that, Corinna. I mean, you started by saying like, I don't believe that is true, that this is now just the purview of a few wealthy folks. Like when you look at most of the solar contracts that are done, they peg to your existing PG&E bill, and then they say it's going to be at least $100 less than your PG&E bill. So right now, it's at least $100 more affordable than the utility. And if you lease to own over 15 years or even 10 years, like, most of these are warranted for at least 25 years, you're getting 10 to 15 years of basically free power. So the money math of this is real now. And I think we just need to help people have access to the folks that are actually reliable and that have good guarantees. And like, there's still people putting solar up that you might not want on your roof. And so making sure like that's what we can all do is help networks get connected to really great folks. And yeah, this is the time to do it. And I don't think it's an environmental imperative. It's in this point, an economic imperative. Like
it's a cost management.
Yeah,
now
but do you want to be paying anything to PG&E? I mean, how much do you want to pay to PG&E? The answer is zero, if you could.
Yeah, but they have a delivery charge, like even just to be connected up here. So no matter what, you're connected in some way, unless you've gone completely off the grid.
You can pay a lot less.
You can pay a lot less. We pay a lot less than we otherwise would, right?
Yeah.
And we are let's see, we're at least 10 years into our solar, but unfortunately, the solar company we bought through is now defunct. SunPower went bankrupt. So, how is that going to protect us for the life of the solar? It's just something that
we want to be encouraging people, Corinna, like there are also a lot of great companies that have been around a long time. The company that I'm using, OxyPower, has been around since like the 80s, and anyone listening should just like email them, and they will tell you a reputable person in your neighborhood, I'm sure.
An installer that can work with you.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really great. Well, I appreciate that. And I do think, especially as we are facing things like windstorms and whatnot that can put your power off, it makes sense to be investing in a solution if you can. And if there's a company that can essentially do as you've said, which is like a lease to own situation, that makes perfect sense to me.
Everyone should do it. I mean, if we're looking for ways of saving, that to me, that's the perfect intersection, is saves money right now. Because often the issue with climate change has been it's a long time away and no one explains the benefits. What we need to do is explain right now the benefits that people can get right now.
So, right now, so they can feel the benefit right away.
Yeah.
Now, how do you ensure that the foundation's investments are truly reflect community-driven priorities rather than more of that top-down mandate perspective?
Yeah, that's really a challenge, I think, because the practice of listening deeply and understanding community concerns is not something that's been that widespread as a practice in philanthropy. So we're talking to really interesting folks about how to think about both governance and listening differently. There's all kinds of non-Big Brother AI solutions. For instance, I'm talking to folks at this group called the Center for Exponential Growth out of a foundation in Bangalore, and they were talking about a WhatsApp feature where basically you pose a question and then you can send it to, in their case, they send it to 100,000 farmers that want to switch from conventional to regenerative, and ask them a different question each week. And the amazing thing about asking a question like that is they got completely different answers than they thought. They thought that the financing was all in place, but 80% of the people said they'd never heard of the financing mechanisms, had no idea how to access them, and would love to learn more. So the conventional wisdom was like, oh, we got this great, which is the other kind of dilemma that we face as a movement, is we think, oh, we passed this great program, like we were just talking about solar, that's it, we've done it. Like, to your point, you actually need to make sure they're not fly-by-night folks that go out of business. You need to make sure that when someone is going on the roof, they don't fall in, that they actually have insurance. Like, you can't just write a program. You need to make sure that the implementation is effective and that people are actually saving money. So the way to do that is listen. And, I think when people think of AI, they think of a very unpersonal, a very machine-driven set of information. But you can actually listen to community and aggregate community voice in really cool ways. I just met with this leader in governance from Taiwan called Audrey Tang, and she was saying that you can now think about in a community, any community, like a series of questions that allow people to understand what they have in common using AI. So I think we're getting to the time where beneficial technologies, and AI can certainly be one of them, with reductions in cost of things like solar, and a desire to be able to at least transform your community. I think that at a school district level, that still for us represents community. made up of individuals. You still know who the people are. When you get to a region or a state or a country, it becomes very anonymized. So our goal is to think of ways of listening. The folks that we fund are deeply rooted in community, and have clear partnerships with the farmers. For instance, we did a tribal solar accelerator. How do we get solar onto Native American tribes throughout our country? And so we provided a large grant that basically helped do the training, all the different services, the tech, so that we had technicians that could service the inverter afterwards, all the way through helping people actually do the installation. And those things then transform a community because they have skills, and most importantly, they have relatively free, in this case, free power to run their businesses, to get their kids onto the school portal when in that case, COVID happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm happy to hear that you've invested in and the nations of the Americas, of the Indigenous peoples. Thank you. Now, I know you've worked primarily across the G20 countries, from the US to Mexico, Brazil, India. You've mentioned a few projects in India thus far in our conversation. Why specifically these regions, and how do you balance this local context with more global scalability? Or is this something you're even looking at?
Oh, yeah, no, completely. We started off, Corinna, by looking at this question of how can bottom up lead to something global, because we're existing within a scientific consensus and context, which is that we need urgent action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we set an ambitious goal of reducing or contributing to, I think one of the things we're very conscious of in philanthropy, it's not us doing it, it's us helping fund people that do this work. So, but through our collective collaborative actions, we want to, in 2035, reduce 1 billion tons of carbon, which is about the same amount of carbon as produced by the entire country of Japan right now. And the way that we think about doing that is by these actions in these different countries. So Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, India, and the US. And we picked them because in the case of Brazil and Indonesia, they have a huge amount of intact rainforest that, because of conventional agriculture, mainly beef production, and in Brazil and in Indonesia, also agriculture is contributing to destroying those countries' resource, which is a resource for the planet. So looking at, in those countries, really the lead way that we can do that is through helping indigenous communities. When you look at land sovereignty in a country like Brazil, where Afro-Indigenous and indigenous communities have ownership and control through legal land tenure of the land and the forest has been cut about 1%. In the areas that isn't the case, it's between 50 and 80%. So just the stewardship of indigenous communities, it can be huge. One of the projects that we just funded, Corinna, is kind of top-down satellite meets community, indigenous community. It's called MAP Biomass. And MAP Biomass has been working for 10, 15 years on getting local data on land use patterns, matching it with satellite data, and then making it available to local communities so they can understand what the threats are and what the land use challenges are. And it also allows government to then enforce and hold the polluters accountable. So there's some really cool stuff happening between satellite data. Our board also just approved a grant to help connect 1 million Amazonians in the Amazon basin to both power and then to internet, really as a way of empowering their lives and at the same time helping them enforce against destructive practices.
Now, I wonder, it sounds to me like you truly believe that running a philanthropic effort in this way, from more of that bottom-up solutions thinking basis, can potentially be a very strong solution towards climate change. I mean, 1 billion tons of carbon reduced from the atmosphere in any stretch, any stretch of time is something commendable. What is the question I'm getting at here? I'll just restate it. I think critics might argue that philanthropy alone, even done in this way, can't solve climate change. So what would you say to them? And how do you see it fitting into the global climate solutions that we might be undertaking? If it's, let's say, a cog in a wheel.
I mean, I would say those critics are 100% right. Like, philanthropy can't solve this. We 100% can't solve this on our own. And it would take a lot of arrogance and hubris to suggest, I think, that we would. We're part of risk capital. If you think about how capital is deployed, a lot of people are looking for a very significant return on their investment. We want a return through impact, but we're not getting funds back. So this is the riskiest capital. We want to make sure it's deployed for things that other people wouldn't fund, that allow us to explore what can work, to lift up amazing people and communities and projects, and show that it isn't just some technocratic, complex electrical system that no one's that interested in. People are interested in, I want to lower my electricity bill. I want to know how to do that. I want to have my kids eat healthy food. How do we do that? So really simple solutions that you can scale, reconnect us back to why we're doing this. Because otherwise, the empty slogan of, we just need to fight climate change, I think we've lost that. People don't know what that means. It doesn't connect to them personally.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. It's really showing them a solution that they can experience in the near term and not the 30-year term, right?
Yeah, and we've had a very outside in view of development, that really needs to change, so that really we have as much to learn or more from Indigenous communities in our own country, in other countries. It isn't about us going somewhere and telling them what to do. It's about us learning from them what we can do. So many solutions about how we exist with nature and each other have been lost. And so regaining that knowledge, for us, part of that is joy. Like, if you don't get to lead a joyous life, if you're not getting to really think about the beauty and joy of eating food, like, this isn't an abstract notion. It's about, how do we help our communities sit down at tables together? How do we help people learn from farmers so that our kids aren't so disconnected that when they see an apple, they don't know where an apple comes from. They actually know, oh, I know the farmer. He came to my school. She came to my school, and we heard a whole story. There's a great person I'd love you to have on your show called Masimoto. He's a peach farmer, and he wrote a book called Eulogy to a Peach, really just to talk about the beauty of the process of growing food, and having a farmer at a meal is a transformational experience. I'll end on, there's a amazing farm called Earthseed Farm. I don't know if you ever read the book by Octavia Butler. There's a religion based on that book in kind of a future climate scenario called Earthseed, and there's a farm up in Sebastopol. And it's really about how you transform community through farming as much as the food that comes from the farm. So I think that's, for us, it's about thinking about that transformation isn't just technical. It's also the heart and the spirit, and through food, through energy, you can really, at a community scale, I think, inspire and hopefully help people's lives be a little bit easier.
Yeah, well, here. Now, you've called for a broader definition of climate philanthropy, one that connects education, healthcare, agriculture. How can everyday people, not just philanthropists, contribute to that expanded vision? I suspect you're going to talk about community.
I mean, I don't know, Corinna, like I think most people that I talk to already think across all these. They don't think in the silos that often climate experts think about. So most people who aren't in the day-to-day work of philanthropy or climate work, they think about all these things in one breath. I mean, as parents, we think about this with ourselves and our kids and our parents, and like, I think it's just removing the artificial barriers that existed and working out what actually works. We spend a lot of time focused on what are we trying to learn from this particular grantee? How do we work together so it isn't just us having a bunch of metrics, but how do we actually engage in a conversation? And mostly when you talk to people at any sense about these issues, they might not think it's climate change, but they know the weather's changing. They know farming's getting harder. They know the utility bills are going up. They know that relates to healthcare. Like, people are smart. And I think the environmental movement has spent too much time talking down to people. I think it's been often condescending. People get this. They just want the tools. They want them to be easy. Back to one of the questions that we talked about, you shouldn't have to know the intricacies of grid interconnectivity in order to put solar on your roof. You just shouldn't. It should be pretty easy. So it hasn't been made easy. You know, if people aren't familiar, you know, in the past with some UN report on climate change, people were like, had disdain, like, you must not care about climate change. Like, no, people are busy. They lead busy lives, and we need to respect and meet people where they're at.
Well, that and climate change is an incredibly complex issue.
Yeah, but you don't need to know everything about it, Corinna. You don't.
No, but I mean, I think that's part of it is people turn off because it's like, oh, it's just one more thing to worry about at a certain point.
Correct.
And there's a barrage of bad news that comes out in that arena, and it's not fun to think about. Nope. So on that point, I want for you to share what inspires you to keep going in this work, and perhaps what message you would want to leave our listeners with about building a more equitable and regenerative future.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think what gives me hope and inspires me actually just is the gift of being alive. Like, it's a pretty amazing thing to wake up every day and like, wow, we get to do this. We get to move forward and create something. And the question is kind of what do we get to create and how do we do that? And doing it, I think most of the people that I think are spending hours and hours online in it on their phones are just like, oh my God, the one thing that I really get from this job is connection with other people. That motivates me. We asked everyone to come back to the office. People love it. Like, literally, like when we interview people, they're like, one of the reasons I want to work at Waverley Street is I get to hang out with people every single day and work. So we lost some of that, both through disconnection to technology, through COVID. But I think the thing that I would say is, like, go and have lunch with a friend and think about like how you relate to all the people in your community or your family or your kid's school. And that's a powerful connection. And I was just reading this story of this 102-year-old yoga instructor from France, and they asked her what the secret was. And she was like, it isn't doing the yoga itself, it's the community of people that I do yoga with. So for us, I think community really is a powerful force for good.
Well, and that comes back to that whole thought of experiencing joy, right? Which you mentioned earlier. It's like enjoying time together.
Like, why are we alive? Like, we all thought a lot about that in COVID as friends and relatives and people that we knew passed away. Like, they didn't get to experience. What do they not experience? It's like the joy of being alive. So that's what we're ultimately wanting to help people get in touch with.
Well, here. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jared. I truly have enjoyed this conversation. And your work with the Waverley Foundation is really focused on showing us what's possible when philanthropy aligns with urgency, equity, and these concepts that connect to regeneration, be it the power that is keeping the lights on and us warm or cool as the seasons demand, and really just ensuring that we are fed, that we're nourished, and that our communities are thriving. I think that's all very commendable, and I look forward to learning more about Waverley Street and the months and years to come. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Corinna. And don't forget, I'm going to phone you afterwards and we're going to get your kids connected to the Farm to School program.
Yeah, I would love to learn more about it and also be connected to, as you mentioned, Masimoto. I have heard about them, so I'd love to have a private connection with them as well.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
It's always such a pleasure to connect with yet another do-gooder who is out there working to make the world just a little better day by day, improving the power of our connections, and ultimately ensuring that the resources that are needed go to the communities in most need, where they can do the most good. I enjoyed learning about Waverley Street Foundation and their important work, and hope you did too. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your community and encourage your friends to subscribe too. Remember, for each subscription to our podcast or our newsletter at caremorebebetter.com, we will plant another tree through our partnership with forestplanet.org. As always, thank you for being a part of this podcast community, because together we can regenerate our global systems and create a better future for all. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.